welcome to the American Scouser podcast. Monday night, we are back in action. As always, the trio is here. I'm your host, Timuchin, over here in Chicago. Beautiful day. Actually, kind of cool, but it's nice in the sun and everything, so I can't complain. Decent summer day over here. And with us is the usual gang. Bickler, let's start with you. What's happened?
It's Monday. It was raining this morning, and it rained off and on today. It is cooler. That's the weather report.
Thank you for supporting that. And then we'll take the 7-day forecast on the way out. Gally, what do we have?
Yeah, weather sucks up here in New England. No, it doesn't really suck. It's just New England in the middle of, early June, so it's basically nothing. We're about to hit summer. It's kind of nice. And what are we talking about tonight? I can't wait to figure this one out.
Yeah, last week we kind of assumed this week would be so much about Arne's press conference and what he said during the week and stuff like that. So I even said to you guys, hey, we'll talk about the Euros because, next week we'll talk so much about what Arne is talking about. We wouldn't get to the Euros. Well, good news. We're going to talk about probably Euros even more now, Bickler. More national team action going on. I'll tell you guys. Okay, so I'll start with the weekly crazy story because I do feel like crap right now. I don't know if you guys see. I don't know if it shows on camera. I probably look as bad as I normally do. But so this morning I was talking to Matush this morning in the show too. I had to do the annual checkup, to see if we're going to see if I live long enough to see Arne's press conference. So I had to do my annual checkup, and then they do all these blood tests and stuff like that. So I gave approximately 8 gallons of freaking blood, I think. And on top of that, she almost dropped the blood, which was horrifying experience. Like, you sit on this chair, they're like, hey, which arm? And I was like, left. So, sticks the needle, and then she keeps loading cartridges like it's a freaking pistol on Call of Duty. It was like click, 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 like filling all these tubes. And then they're sitting on this basically tray. It looks like an old high school thing, like the tray comes in front of you and stuff. And then she reaches over trying to get something, and all I see is tubes of my blood rolling down the shelf. So I snatched them as a reflex. And she was like, oh, nice catch. I was like, no shit. I almost gave another 5 gallons of blood over here. You have to fast the way it is. But yes, that's how my day started after the morning show over here. And then I was trying to prepare for this. And I was like, hey, there is no topics to talk about except, Bickler, national team games. How excited do you get? I mean, mind you, it's not even the Euros right now. It's just friendlies, more about who's not going to get injured before the friendlies. But did you watch any of these games? Mind you, I only watched Turkey. That's it.
I did not. And when we discussed what we're going to talk about tonight, and we knew this was going to be international heavy for the second weekend in a row, my basic goal for today is to get offline tonight. And we have the exact same amount of followers, and no less than we did when we started this pod. So that's the goal tonight.
Yes, it's going to be pretty tricky, but we'll do our best. No, I do have a couple of topics for you guys that I was going to ask. But Gally, have you watched any?
Little. I've watched a little bit of the England matches. I watched a little bit of a couple of different friendlies. I saw some of the France-Canada 0-0. That was watching paint dry. I watched some of the debacle on Saturday with the United States getting dismantled by Colombia. But yeah, nothing of real importance. It's the Euros will be fun, but I think it's going to take getting into that tournament before anything really feels like it's happening. At this point, these friendlies mean basically nothing.
Yeah, it's kind of like a little bit of let's not get injured over thing. I'm watching Turkey's games. They pretty much almost started with totally different 11s. I almost feel all these teams, especially who are going to the tournaments, don't want to give too much away, it feels like. So it's a matter of, put Arden, you never saw Ferd, you never saw some of the guys that are going to be in the starting 11. But then I'm sure Mateusz is not happy with Turkey right now because they don't have any strikers left. Lewandowski went out injured in the first half. To be fair, the first one hurt himself celebrating. So if that guy can make it to the Euros, that has to be the worst thing ever, is scoring in a friendly game against Turkey, and then he just jumped and did the fist pump and he landed on his ankle. And yeah, that has to be, if he misses the Euros, that guy, I mean, he was crying and stuff. So he might know that it's pretty bad and stuff like that. But yeah, you're right. That nobody wants to give anything away. It makes for a lot of boring games. But to be honest, Bickler, the group stages are always a little more cagey. Just because, especially the first games and stuff, it doesn't really get going until second or third game.
Yeah, those first ones are rough, right? Like I feel like we could, I don't know how there's a way around it. I mean, obviously everyone wants to lock up and not give away goal advantages right out of the gate, but like it is tough when you're locked into these like first round games against two obscure Eastern Bloc teams and like, nobody wants to score. But I mean, I think that has to lend itself to the intrigue of the second leg, right? If everyone's closer, the goal differential is at least closer. So I mean, we'll see. I feel it feels like I don't like remember the last time we ended a season and we had a summer competition that it felt like this long of a break. And I don't know if it's just because like of Liverpool's particular situation where there's been no movement on just about anything. But yeah, it feels like I feel like it's taken a year for this tournament to kick off.
Yeah, it's like tumbleweeds around the curfew over there. But so let me ask you this though, Gally. I mean, because we were talking about this actually briefly with my brother over the weekend, because obviously with Mourinho coming to Fenerbahce, like a big offseason and stuff like that. And like similar situation over here where we have Arne coming in after Klopp. And in some ways, while sucks maybe for us, having Copa America and the Euros and stuff, almost like a slight distraction to overall world of soccer/football, does it almost help these newer managers taking over? Because it's not like they're like waiting at home either, so they can do their business behind the scenes and get stuff going and not be the focus of attention, just because I know it is right now, but once Friday comes in and the tournament starts, the entire focus will shift there. Now, right now, people don't know where to go, so it's always like, what is this guy, what is he doing, and stuff like that. Do you think it helps these new managers to have this in some ways? I know it limits practice time to get those guys into camp, but especially getting your shit going, maybe the administrative stuff, setting your office up, putting all your little collectibles up, gives you like more time to do all that crap.
From the standpoint of media commitment, exposure, interviews, just having to be the kind of front of the story, I think it definitely helps. I think from a tactical standpoint on the pitch, I think it makes things a little bit more difficult because you don't get as many players, especially if you're at a top club where you have so many of your players are international quality level, like Liverpool has. So many of their players are playing either in the Copa America or in the Euros. All that said, I think it's helping Arne Slot more than anyone because just all the hoopla around England, I think it's exactly why Liverpool hasn't done a press conference. They feel like, I think they're going to grease the press conference in on like the fourth day of the Euros, and it'll probably be a day where England is like playing. And it'll feel weird, but I think it's almost a way for them to kind of control the narrative around this manager, just like they're controlling him actually that he's head coach and dumb people like me keep calling him manager. I think it's an important thing for them. So I think it actually helps Liverpool specifically that there's a major tournament. And I think it also really helps that England is a big story in this tournament.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, right. I mean, the last couple of times, I guess, with the squads they're going in as like, favorites, semi-favorites, or whatever. But at the same time, Bickler, isn't it a lot better? I mean, I almost expected. I think Gally makes a good case. You do it on the fourth day and stuff like that. But I almost felt like, he would do it right before. And then as people are like, I have a question or something, he's like, hey, look, Euros. And then just walk away the other side and then like do his work while everybody is now occupied. Because he's just going to come out there and just give general answers. He's not going to be like, here's the formation and everything. When do you think we will get to hear from him?
I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. I would have thought we would have heard something today, honestly. I was expecting it to break today going into Tuesday over there, but I mean, it makes sense. Like, you're not going to have all those questions if the Euro's going on, right? I mean, it just seems weird to me. I thought that the club would have wanted it to be a little bit more on the forefront, just because it's like so. I would think they would want it to publicly be a new chapter, but I guess maybe Galley's right. Maybe they don't feel like they can control it as much if it's like a prime time spot and announcement, and they want to slip it behind the scenes. I really did expect something today, so I don't know. I at this point, like, I wouldn't be surprised if it's like at the beginning of the tournament. I wouldn't be. It would be super weird if it was the end, but like, I don't know if it's that much weirder than it happened in 3 weeks before. I don't know.
I mean, if you go with your theory, Gally, and it's a legit one, why? Like, why not trot him out there and just give his general answers and this is my philosophy, blah blah blah, and transfer, we're interested in everything, we're listening to everything, just the usual, just press play and then just play the regular preseason talk. Why delay it? Because it's clearly there's already like an angst around fans, right? Because whoever was coming in after Klopp, there was going to be there. Why almost feed it further?
Maybe they don't want to make a big press conference statement for him because they know he can only fail in that situation, and not that he'll be a failure, but because he's not Jurgen Klopp, and like Klopp had to have a press conference. He took over in October or November. It was mid-season. There was a weekend, and then he was taking over like a week later. They announced it, and it was this big pomp and circumstance. When I think about it, like, you don't get a lot of these big press conferences when they're not mid-season changes. Like, that's usually when you actually remember hearing about it. I think off-season ones are always kind of under the radar. And maybe what Liverpool is trying to do is just say, like, we've made a what we believe is a seamless move internally. We're ready for this move. We don't feel like we need to step up to the podium because, to be honest, if he isn't the manager, he isn't making personnel decisions about incomings and outgoings. Outside of like his love for the club and what he's here to do and all the pomp and circumstance stuff that we're going to hear 1,000 times from him anyways in every press conference, what does he really have to say if he has no bearing on what's going to happen this summer? So maybe in some ways they're almost protecting himself from a yes man, quick little presser that comes across like he has little to nothing to say, because I'm not sure he really does.
Yeah, he's like putting up shells over there. He's like, Michael, can you look? Is this straight and stuff like that? And that's when Edwards chimes in. He's like, yes, it looks straight. But here's my question then. I mean, this is an interesting topic because Gally keeps calling him coach over here. How much do you think, Vickler, that he has in terms of like the inputs? I mean, I'm assuming all the stuff has already been talked about. They're not like, hey, are you free Tuesday? I want to talk to you about where we're going to play Trent. I'm assuming like all this stuff is determined and he's had his input in terms of what he thinks should be done and what kind of players should be, they should be going after and stuff like that. How much of a say do you think is there?
Oh, I think he definitely has a say. This kind of, to me, internally is going to work very similar in my head to how the old committee used to work. That basically blew up. We're like, essentially,
everyone hated.
I was like, everyone hated. I think essentially what his role is going to be is that they're going to have a list of players, right, that they've essentially scouted and pared this thing down to, and then he's going to go from that list and pick who he wants, and then make the argument as to why he wants them, right? And I think that's an important distinction to make because, like, even though Edwards and Ward and all these people have this, really, really great track record of building a business and getting the right guys in, I do think that nobody knows the system better than the manager or the head coach, whatever you want to call him. And I think that's where that is going to come into play. I think he's going to say, I want a player like this because he does X, Y, and Z that this current system needs of a player, whereas this player can provide A and B, but not C, right? Yeah. So I think he is going to have a say in regards to what players are the best fit for the system. and I think they'll work it out. And I think, the reason they brought him in is because he's obviously young, has a vision. But I think that he has the ability to work with a team where I think that, very apparently became a problem under Jurgen over time.
Yeah, I almost expect the early Klopp years, right? Like working together, so he has a say and he can kind of, demand certain type of players and give characteristics that he's looking for and stuff like that. And they're like, what you want really matches with this. It's like a dating app for like soccer players kind of a thing. And then they get him the guy that fits the economy and the budget, I guess, Gally, in terms of what they're going to spend. So I guess having said that, I know whenever we talked about managers all summer, right? We're like, he'll come and he'll bring him, like they're like tied up or whatever. Do you think Arne comes in with like a list, like a post-it that he put a couple of names on there and says, hey, these guys will be really good to get? And is that something that, you think Michael Edwards would even ask, or do they just take that note and be like, yeah, that's great. So here's what we're doing. And then just tell them actually what they have lined up.
I am sure that Arnie had a few names on a little sticky note that he slid to Michael Edwards across the table, like the old "Do you like me" notes in school. My bet is
Gally has been passing a lot of these in school. You could just tell.
I used to get those notes.
You even did the motion in terms of how you.
No, I used to get those notes slid to me. Actually, that was when I was young and. Nice.
Girls giving you notes saying like, "Can I have your jersey?" Like just back.
Yeah, pretty much.
Check this box for yes.
Check this box for yes. No, I think that Michael Edwards definitely had names on the list, and Arnie had conversations. I have less faith that Michael Edwards is giving. I think Arne's getting a little bit of say. I don't think Arne came in being able to say, like, I'm bringing this player or you have to get me this guy. Like, because let's be real. The last manager that said, we're going to do this, I'm going to re-sign this guy, I'm going to keep this guy, made Michael Edwards think about working somewhere else. Okay? And then he made Eddie Ward basically be like, I'm done. I'm out of here. And then as soon as there was a chance, he came running back to the same job he had before. So, clearly, there was something about the power difference between management and the manager / coach. And I don't think they're going to open that Pandora's box early in this relationship. And I think part of the reason Arne got this job is because he wasn't demanding that. Where if you hired Jose Mourinho or you hired Antonio Conte or you hired Thomas Tuchel, you are probably going to have to acquiesce to some of their decision-making process because they have so much clout in the game. And I think Arne Slot, this is the step you get when you're willing to acquiesce a little bit. Similar to what De Zerbi got at Brighton when he left Russia. And people were like, really? Does he belong at a Premier League club? And then they gave him a little bit of more rope this year. And to be fair to De Zerbi, he hung himself with that rope because he got to pick more of his players and it didn't work out for him in his second year. So I think that's where we're at. I think this is a manager getting his first big step. He'll get a little say, but not much. I think a year or two from now, we'll see a little bit more of his footprint on transfer business. I think this is going to be about Edwards this window for me.
So, but having said that, Bickler, don't you think if you're Edwards, you're like, if you're making the pie, you're like, hey, your slice is always 15%, dude. Like, this is how it's going to start, and this is how it's going to go. We're not going to do this kind of like the relationship he had initially with Klopp, where it started maybe 15 and then it became like 20, 30, 40, and it just kept bigger. Is it better to kind of set and say, hey, this is how it's going to work. You can have this much input, but we're going to have this input, and this is how we're going to roll at the end. I think, it's inevitable that over time, especially if you're successful, that ratio will, Arne would want that ratio increasing. But don't you think it's smarter for Edwards to say, here are the parameters, and we're not changing it? Because last time I left it flexible on the move, it just got out of freaking control.
Yeah, I think there is I think this. I think it's always tougher when the system changes when the manager's already been there, right? Like when they made sort of a restructure to the way they did it in general. I think that's when it sort of like really left that loophole for Jurgen to try to grab more of a say there. But yeah, I think that stuff had to be a really critical part of the search for a new manager, right? I mean, like the first piece was obviously getting Edwards and then Edwards' people established. But the second piece is like when they were looking at managers, they had to be looking at managers they knew would be open to like not having full say and full control, right? Which in a lot of ways is I think the direction this club needed to go because they needed like the best piece of business that they ever had was the way that we were doing it in the early years under Edwards. So they brought that back. And then B, they needed a manager who was going to come in and consider this a long-term project. Like I think my really big concern was that we were going to get a retread that was going to come in here for 18 months to 2 years and be a gap before somebody else, which is what I didn't want. So in a lot of ways, I think this is great because you got a young manager who's hungry for it and really considers this the apex for him, right? And I think that's important because I really do think that Slot believes that he can go be here and make this a lifetime stop, even though you don't see that very often in sports anymore with managers.
Yeah, I mean, in the comments, Brian Shelton says Edwards, Hughes, and Marquez are going to have the bigger say. So Slot is hired for his ability to work with what he's given, and I do. I mean, the problem, I guess, is Gally that we'll never know, right? I mean, unless something goes south and Slot gets out there and throws the system under the bus and say I didn't want him anyway or something like that, we will never know unless. Let me ask you that. If suddenly you get a guy who used to play with him or from the Dutch league and stuff like that, would that almost signal that he has actually more input than most expect? Because Cersei is expecting less than 1%. I really don't think it's that low. I don't think he's just like, hey, no, you go manage. We got this over here. I don't think Slot would go into an arrangement in that sense.
No, I think he understands what type of an arranged marriage he just got himself into. Yeah. Like, I think he understands the parameters ahead of time before he signed on. Here's my thing about Slot and Klopp, and then I'll answer your question that you just posed. I think the difference is that when Jurgen Klopp came to Liverpool, he was already a known commodity. He was a big, big star, and it was a big, big get. So Edwards had no choice but to kind of acquiesce to some of the decision-making, to have the big press conference, to let him be the big star and let him have a lot of say. I think over time, it didn't work in how the dynamics worked. I think this is a different environment. I think now they're hiring Jurgen Klopp. In their mind, I don't want to compare this. Don't everyone at me yet. I think that they believe they're hiring the man that Dortmund hired. Like Michael Edwards thinks he is finding Dortmund's Jurgen Klopp. Yeah. The energetic, excitable young manager ready to take world football by storm. There's a reason big clubs offered Arne Slot jobs and he turned them down. Like other clubs thought they were going to get this guy to be the next big thing. I believe we're lucky to get this guy. We'll find out in a few years whether or not it works. But I think that Edwards, to Paul's point, I think he has a little say to start, but I think there's a real room for him to grow into being like this big figurehead piece. And I think in Edwards' eyes and management's eyes, he can be their guy. Like the way that the guys at Dortmund believe Klopp was their guy. Like they found him at Mainz and then he blew up on the world scene. I think that's what they believe Arne Slot's going to do at Liverpool. And I think his footprint on the club will grow as his tenure at the club grows, just like it did for Klopp. I think it's a real difference because when Klopp came in here, he was 3 steps above Edwards, which I think made for an uncomfortable kind of working relationship originally, which I think then ended with Edwards saying, I don't want to do this anymore in this shadow. because it would have only got worse for him. And I think these two guys might actually grow together, and it might be a really, really, hopefully a really special thing for the club and for Arne Slot specifically.
And even then, really, like Klopp didn't come in with full say; it just kind of like increased over the years.
Right.
And obviously, he kind of like took the club over in a way. So I think he kind of like slowly like increased that. It's going to be interesting because I'm actually looking forward to it. Pretty excited about it because I do think we did get the right guy. But like you're saying, Galdi, there's no way to know. Here's an interesting tidbit though. On Thursday, we'll have an interview with Kim actually from the Netherlands Sporters Club. And we'll probably hear from them before we hear from Arne himself. But yeah, it'll be interesting. I do want to find out how. You see a lot of stuff. We've seen a lot of videos of his farewell and stuff like that, right? But I do want to get a sense of what people over there actually think. Not only his fans, they're going to give the farewell. But let's face it, you go around and a lot of fans of opposing teams are pretty happy that Klopp is out of the picture because they feel like, that might be a chapter that's closing for like Liverpool and stuff. I would love to know, what other clubs fans are thinking and stuff like that. So do stay tuned for that. So hopefully Thursday we'll get a recorder. So we should be able to release that sometime on Friday or over the weekend. Either way, it'll be before probably Slot Talk. So let's talk a little bit about transfers. My favorite topic. So I was asking this morning, so I want to ask you guys, I did ask Matush, we were talking about Trafford in terms of like Newcastle trying to get him, and in terms of like, I think there was like 60 million was like the starting offer and stuff like that. Bickler, one, what does that mean for Kelleher? Are we realistic with something like 25 to 30 if Trafford is 16? And secondly, if we sell Kelleher, are you going to be comfortable with another young guy with Adrian behind them? Because otherwise the replacement cost is going to be about the same one.
Well, I saw some random rumor that Adrian wasn't going to re-sign, so that'd be interesting too.
I guess we're assuming he's going to sign just because he was offered, right? But yeah, I know. Okay.
I wonder if we're going to see this kid out of the academy, the Brazilian kid, Petugala or whatever. Like, I know that we were real high on him. So I think that's kind of a natural succession to like making like with Kelleher going out. And then I think you probably need at some point, you need a veteran back there, right? You need to have an older keeper back there, whether it's Adrian or somebody else. I'm not sure. Can you get 25 in the market if Trafford goes for 16? I think that's going to be tough. I don't want to say it's impossible because Edwards has done crazier things. Although, I think the verdict is out on it a little bit. So I don't know that you're going to get people quite as eager to go. But look, like Keller is a player. He's a good young keeper that can play with the ball at his feet. There's going to be a lot of clubs that have interest in that. So maybe if you get into a situation where you have 2 or 3 clubs going at it, you can maybe get it climbing up in that area. But I think if we're getting 20 for him, I feel like that's pretty good.
Yeah, here's the thing. We kind of like talked, and there were some good points made in this morning's coffee show in terms of like, what Keller has that, Trafford doesn't and stuff. But you bring a good point. I almost assumed, Gally, that, if he was offered that Adrian would stay on and probably eventually be in like the goalkeeper coaching staff or something like that. I know Taffarel is staying, but would you be, if he's staying, right? Would you feel comfortable going into a new season knowing Alisson's injury history with just having a young kid behind them? Because we always assume that Adrian would be the third and not the second. Because Adrian is not there. Yeah, you go out and you get somebody experienced who'll be willing to, chase some trophies with Liverpool and come over here and take the role behind. There's no shame in sitting behind Alisson at least. But if Adrian is staying, are you comfortable with that setup going into a new season?
No, honestly, I'm not. And honestly, I don't think Adrian's staying because he hasn't signed the deal. Like, if you are chomping at the bit and you're shocked that Liverpool offers you a contract, you sign it immediately. Like, the fact he hasn't signed it means he really likes that offer from La Liga and the idea of going back to Spain. I think they're offering him being a backup, and it's at his boyhood club. So it's going home to like end his career where he started. To me, I wouldn't begrudge him at 41 or 42. He's done his time here, like in my opinion. I don't know that it will be. I think he's like 38. I made him about 5 years older, like most people.
He's a young 37.
37. Sorry, 38. Well, I don't know if it'll be the Patugula kid because I do think he's a good player. I think they really like the kid they had last year. Made a couple of Europa League squads. Yamros or Yam. It's like Jamroz. He just made his international debut. I think it was for Bosnia Herzegovina or whatever it was. He basically he's another one who's coming up, and they kind of have a little bit of faith in him. I thought Kazi was spot on Friday, actually. I think you sell Kelleher for like 20, 30 million, and you sign like Alex McCarthy for like decent wages to be your backup. Yeah. Guy's been a backup in the Premier League. He takes a homegrown slot if you have, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
you do all the stuff you have to do with a player like that. Like, I think that's where you go. The Trafford thing makes no sense to me. There's two ways to go, in my opinion. You go buy the best young goalkeeper you can get your hands on, like a 20-year-old stud, and you build on him, or you give Alisson another contract. It's one or the other. Like, to me, this whole buying a $16 million keeper that was a starter at Burnley and is on the England radar for years to come is stupid to me. That makes no sense. You don't, to me, and I know Sir Z calls him poor in the comments. The kid is a really, really, really good keeper. Burnley was one of the worst defensive sides in the entire Premier League, and he had never had any Premier League experience and was thrust into starting at the top flight as a 19-year-old English kid. He was set up to fail, in my opinion. I think the kid has all the talent in the world. I think the kid is the best young English goalkeeper in the country.
That's more about Pope's condition, doesn't it? If Newcastle is forking out 16 million for him,
it might, or it might be that they know that they can make a lot of profit by selling an English goalkeeper for a profit that they only paid 11 million from, because they got him when Burnley got relegated, so they got him for a cut rate price. So maybe they're going to sell him this summer. Because all these teams are trying to balance the books by selling English players for profits, which is a whole nother discussion for a different day. But I think the Trafford thing is weird to me. And I don't think we've ever been interested in him personally. I don't think we're paying a quarter of what I think we'll spend all summer long for a goalkeeper, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it might be a smart move to just take the money and find a more suitable thing and actually just add that money to your like transfer budget, because I think Keller kind of has like forced the issue a little bit. I know he's just answering basic questions, but it's very clear he wants to be number one. It's very clear he's not going to be number one as long as Alisson is there. And I think it's becoming more and more clear that Alisson will be there unless we kind of convince Keller to stick around until we send Alisson to the Saudis, if they're still around in like 2-3 years over there. Speaking of people getting rid of people to balance the books, I just saw that a little bit ago, because I mean, obviously it says an hour ago, from our friend over here. But Douglas Luiz, for example, is a player that, you know, like Villa is looking to offload. They're trying to get some cash for him and stuff like that. More than the player it's himself, Bickler, which I do want to ask about the player too. Do you want us to go after a player specifically that has Premier League experience, or do you care at all?
I don't care.
Defensive midfield, for center back, these positions that we speak of as in need, not just, you know, roll the dice guys.
I don't think I care as much as a lot of people about whether they have Premier League management, especially considering the fact that our manager doesn't. So, like, I care more about the fact that they're a system fit, right, than I do about what league they're coming from. So, I mean, obviously, a player like Douglas Luiz would be massive just because he's been so effective. Like, I would argue he was Villa's most important player, and that's including Watkins last year. So, I mean, if there is a player that was if he had interest in Liverpool and he was like a realistic target, and I'm talking realistic in terms of like the price for him versus his age and Edwards' like algorithm that he's got going out. Like if that was a player that came through that algorithm and survived it, I'd be all for it just because I think he's a massive player.
I mean, I feel like I know what you think. I mean, he's 26 years old, so I think it fits like a glove. But I mean, for a midfielder, I guess, Gally, I value it a lot more than a center back. I think, and not to mention the center back you're getting is mostly for depth at the end of the day, right? You're replacing Matip. I mean, you don't know about Konate's form and stuff. You're probably going to get a lot of play time. But I feel like in terms of adjusting to the pace of the game, it's the hardest spot, especially as a defensive midfielder. So I personally value it a lot more. Where do you stand on the Premier League experience to value kind of a deal? Because obviously those guys are going to come at more of a premium.
I think the Premier League experience and knowing that he is a fit for both the tactics and the speed of the league and the physicality of the league is massive. The fact that he's done it at a young age. I'd argue this. I think we've all said on this podcast, as much as we hate Manchester City, that Rodri might be the best player at his position of any player in the whole world. Like 1 to 1A, Rodri might be that much bigger of a step. I'd argue Douglas Luiz is the second best Rodri in the Premier League. And as scary as it is, I'd argue if City knew what they had in Douglas Luiz when he was in their youth academy, instead of selling him to Villa for nothing and then trying to buy him back, they might have kept him and saved a ton of money. And, you couldn't even imagine what it would be like to have him and Rodri in the same setup or in the same kind of training sessions. Like, to me, if you had put Douglas Luiz on Liverpool this year, I think they're right there towards the top of the Premier League to maybe win the title. And I honestly think he would have been a difference even at Arsenal, even with Declan Rice, because it would allow Rice to go forward and do what he does better, where he's not the 6, he's actually like an 8 who can push forward but anchors in when you need it. And I think that's the difference for me. And I think that's why, to me, Luiz is like a poor man's Rodri, is that Rodri does everything. He can play the 6 and do all the defensive midfield stuff you need and can break forward, score a big goal, and make a move. I just think that what it comes down to really is I think that Douglas Luiz offers something to Villa that they're not going to be able to replace, even though they believe between the young Ramsey kid and the kid they signed at the end of last year that they have enough in the midfield. I think when you get to Champions League, you're going to miss a destroyer. And I think Juventus knows exactly what they're getting.
And I guess, I mean, if I gave you the choice, for example, Bickler, that this is where I say, like, I value the Premier League experience more, maybe because we've seen him more, because obviously we follow the Premier League much closer. But between, for example, Ederson, who's only 24 from the Brazilian national team, compared to Luiz, I would personally prefer Luiz just because I know that he can handle the pace of the Premier League in midfield.
I mean, sure. I think if you stack those two players next to each other a couple of years apart, you're going to go with the guy that's got more experience in the league that you're coming from and you've seen week in and week out. So I agree with you there 100%. I mean, if you're putting them side by side, that's who I'm picking as well.
So let's talk about this. I mean, for the transfers then, I'm assuming, I know what you guys think, nothing's going to happen, Gally, probably during the Euros and stuff, correct?
I wouldn't expect it to happen unless it's a player that's either out of a country or out of a national team. Maybe outgoings. I think that's all we're probably going to hear at this point. So basically, Costas will be sold.
Poor Costas. Greece is there, isn't he? Aren't they?
He didn't make the national team.
Ouch. I did not realize.
So what happens when your manager hates you for half a decade?
Hey, freaking Altai has not played for United. I think he played for them once, and he's in the freaking squad over there. He was actually starting one of the friendlies. I think he's the third guy, but still. What do you guys think about that, by the way? Like, totally off topic, but since you like brought it up, Gally, national teams, and I don't know how the U.S. team is because I don't follow. God knows Pickler doesn't. The U.S. national team, but do you guys have the same syndrome, and how do you feel when guys who are regularly there get a call back and get the playing time based on having been there as opposed to being in form? And I don't know how US does this. You follow it obviously the closest out of all three of us. Bickler and I combined times 5. So go for it.
I don't think the U.S. really does that too much. They've been a little better recently. Listen, the United States just got drubbed by a mediocre Colombia team in neutral 5-1 in a match on home turf that they should have been up for in preparation for a tournament they should be trying to like put a good foot forward. There's nothing positive to talk about the United States at this point. Like they're not picking based on merit. They're not picking based on talent. They have a boob in charge. The guy was a bad hire when they hired him. He was an even worse hire when they
fire and sit back, Pickler.
No, I swore to myself I wasn't gonna do this. I wasn't gonna let myself.
It's like we got 30 minutes to burn up here. What am I gonna bring up? Oh, golly.
So no, but this is what I'll say when it comes to the U.S. and the selection teams, and it's not even about the U.S. I think that there are times where teams select based on history. And I think England, as an example, I think in the past, Southgate has been criticized for selecting on history, picking Jordan Henderson for friendlies while the guy is playing down in Saudi Arabia and barely playing. That was kind of a joke, right? Like, I think Southgate could get called out for that. I'll give Southgate a lot of credit. This, to me, feels like the greatest selection of talent he's ever picked for a tournament, where he actually looked at everyone and he was like, You know what? I am taking 4 players from Crystal Palace. Go fuck yourself, United. I'm taking 4 Crystal Palace players. Like, there are 2 midfielders and a starting center back from Crystal Palace. Like,
but does US do the same thing?
They have started to. I think they used to fall a little bit into this world of picking the players that played at the big clubs or the players that they'd called in before. I think they're starting to call the players in that are playing the best. The problem with that is these are players we don't know. And I think that I think in England, we know that Eze is a great player. We heard the whole second half about how Adam Wharton was changing everything for Crystal Palace. And I'm telling you right now, that's going to be the name. You watch. That will be the soup du jour. This Adam Wharton kid for England, the midfielder. He will be the star that comes out of this Euros for England. Like, I genuinely
Shut that crap down. Clip this one.
The kid came out of, I think he was in the championship last year. They bought him mid-season. He was a huge part of why the whole second half worked. He's probably going to get some starts next to Rice in the midfield because I don't think the Manu kid is actually ready to play this type of minutes. But I think this England team is a prime example of picking based on form, leaving guys like Madison home, like leaving Sterling home, leaving, Slabhead home. He brought Kanza and Mark Guy. Like, these are the center backs.
Notice, like, he keeps shifting from the U.S. team back to England over and over and over.
No one wants to talk about the United States.
You know what? Here's what I was going to ask. Actually, you're right, because I only watched the highlights of the game, and I was like, oh my God, stop trying to build from the back, because they kept turning the ball over and over again. Stop passing the ball back in there. But I just watched the highlights. But honestly, I did not know. I literally looked at the phone. I thought that game was in Colombia. And Bickler, I know you're against U.S. national team overall. But you have many other
That's
reasons.
just what Columbus, Ohio looks like, dude. It's a little rough.
For Colombia. I mean, isn't that what's kind of like wrong about it? Is it because of the manager? Is it because they haven't had success? I mean, I was trying to think of a scenario where, Turkey plays a friendly somewhere in Turkey, and somehow there's like more Romanian fans than like Turkish fans. It looks like it's like a Romania away game or something like that during a friendly, especially this week, which we didn't get to. But, all this talk about bringing like Premier League games and stuff like that here, like, I feel like it's such a bad freaking sign for soccer overall in terms of like Americans involved when like the away team makes it look like the home
I
team.
don't
Or
know,
is that
dude.
just because here's a chance for us to watch Colombia here in the US kind of thing?
So there's 100 reasons why the U.S. national team's broken, and I don't feel like the attendance has anything to do with it. Because I think here's the thing: like you're taking a sport in the country where, like, I would argue that United States is probably the biggest melting pot in the world of cultures from around the world in immigrants from elsewhere that have landed here, right? And you're going to take the number one international sport, inject it into a country where it is still very much in the minority for people watching it, even though it's the fastest growing sport in this country. I would say, like, if you were to go in, the percentages are going to favor the Hispanics in terms of who's watching soccer and following football in this country. So when you have a Colombia match, I'm going to assume that all of Colombia in the United States is traveling to that match like it's a preseason Liverpool game and we would do, right?
I guess that's fair.
And I think that you really have less U.S., like American guys like us who are going to travel that far. It's going to be more people that are a couple hours away coming in. I think it's just, I have a hard time gauging it off of that specifically, and I think that's what you're going to run into this country until soccer continues to grow another 5-10 years down the road, and like really is fully embraced wide scale at the normal average sports fan level. Because I don't think we're quite there yet. And so,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No,
Go ahead. Sorry, keep going.
I was just going to say, I just think that there's some fundamentally things that are rotten with the core setup of the way the U.S. men's national team develops players, including how we take our best talent and where we put them.
Yeah, no, I don't want to stop you while we got a rare chance to have you talk about the U.S. national team here. But
yeah, I know.
Is it because does the manager or the system or the lack of success play a role in that, Gally? Like, if this team was rolling, would that ratio be different? I know what Bickler is saying, and I do understand that. Like, if you have any Turkish team go to Germany, it does feel like like a Turkish home game. But at the same time, do you think if the team was a bit more successful, maybe people were kind of behind the team more? It just feels like a lot of people have soured off of it, partially probably because of the management and all the drama.
Yeah, I think the combination of the management and the manager does not instill any confidence. Like, let's just be real. There was a period when Jurgen Klinsmann took over this team. People were excited for what was going to happen. And let's be fair, Jurgen Klinsmann lost the United States men's national team. He lost the dressing room. It didn't work, and they were trending towards not qualifying for a World Cup, and they fired him. And he was right to be fired. Let's also admit he was 2 cycles too early, because this was the group of young talent he needed. Young Americans who wanted to be over in Europe trying to ply their craft and learn at like a different level of football and learn and play a different style. I'm not saying Klinsmann would be any better. Okay, yes, I am. Because I think a freaking buffoon named Bobo would be better than Greg Berhalter. Like, but I've been pounding this drum.
Bobo is a good baboon name, but go ahead.
It would be a good buffoon name. Bobo
the baboon. We should make this a mascot of some sort.
It would be good. It'd be the new United States mascot. It'll stand right next to Greg Berhalter in his skinny jeans and his freaking sneakers. But the guy's a moron. He just stands on the sideline. He does nothing. He made no real changes. He continues to start the Ballenguden guy up top because he's played a few minutes in France and didn't score any goals there, wasn't good enough to play at Arsenal. So he's like, you must be better than all the American kids. Haji Wright has been just scoring goals like a madman on 2 different continents and in the championship, proving he can do it in England and can't get a sniff. Like it's kind of, it's almost comical at this point that we still consider it a joke that we hired an MLS guy and wonder how he can't even get MLS results with the United States national team. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. 2 years from now, the World Cup will come around and people will be like, America's ready to do something. And Jesse Marsh will take a bunch of Canadians and go farther than we will. And probably the most qualified guy to coach the American team will be coaching a bunch of fucking Canadians, saying A as they laugh at us as we're eliminated after the group stages.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, I don't have a horse in the race. I couldn't care less, personally. But I feel like, if it does get better, I mean, we've seen it in the women's game, right? It kind of like boosts everything. And it's, it's a lot better for, selfish people like me who love the sport as the sport kind of like grows. And we've seen it grow and it will continue to grow, like Bickler is saying. But I think it just definitely helps when there's like glimmers of like little success, but continuous success, not just like winning one game where it's like, oh, we beat Brazil and stuff like that. It's just like, maybe a couple of good tournament runs and stuff like that to bring the excitement. But I think you're right. There's just like too much. I mean, even as an outsider, I just feel like there's too much negativity around. It's like the Manchester United of national teams, if you will. There's like a lot of drama and negativity and clouds around that national team, it feels like. And a lot of, with their best players, probably that we've seen in a long, long time that are world-class players who actually play in Europe and stuff, not just Major League Soccer. But I wanted to bring that, but at least since we touched up on it, Bickler, let me ask you that. First it came out, Tom said, hey, I have a dream. We're going to play Premier League games all over the world. Then John is like, I'm not feeling that. But then the door is already being opened. And we've kind of like talked about the Super League stuff in the past and shit. But how feasible do you think something like that is? And how are you for it, against it? Where do you stand?
Against it because I can't see a world in where we're ever going to get a sanctioned like opportunity to play less games, right? So if we're playing the same amount of games and we're adding that a ridiculous amount of travel time to the week, I am firmly on the out on that idea.
I'm assuming, that the logistics of all, but where there's a will, there's a way. When there's money involved, it will be done, Gally. But I can only imagine like they would do something like, because I was thinking about the same thing that Bickler brought up. Like, when the hell are they going to do that? I mean, travel time to like some of the countries they're naming, like, like they go to Japan. It's not like going to Denmark and it's like a 2-hour flight or something like that. The only time I can think of is maybe like right before the stupid international break kind of a thing. And from there, you guys can go whatever the hell you're going to go kind of a deal. It just doesn't seem feasible. But like real quick, like where do you stand on it?
My thing is this, guys. If they're talking about like everyone was losing their mind because they were like, how are you going to play in London and then in Brazil and then in Tokyo? The same team's not playing those 3 games. Like, the greatest, like
Scotty.
These are going to be like scheduled matches years apart. And there'll be some type of rotating basis where there's some type of 5 games a year where certain teams can go. Maybe it's teams that are outside of Europe or the top 5, or they're going to make sure. And let's be real, they're also not going to like send Liverpool to play United in Singapore. It's going to be Liverpool against Crystal Palace so that they can get half the crowd in and the other half gets to see this weird team that plays in red and blue. But like I said it on your talk show on Monday when I was commenting in. And I know Kazi was really upset because he wanted to hammer on FSG people. And my whole thing was like, Tom Werner is part of the economic like development and TV contract subcommittee of the Premier League. You know why? He produced 5 of the biggest television shows in the history of the United States. When he got involved with the Premier League, they were like, we want this guy near TV. because he knows how to make money. And he started talking about that. And then 48 hours later, FIFA's like, we're approving playing games in other countries. He dropped that missive. And then John Henry was like, and I disagree because fucking Spirit of Shankly had to bring their asses all up, right? And get their fucking panties in a bunch. Here's the thing. You don't want ticket prices to go up. You don't want increased revenue of day of game sales inside of England. Then don't bitch when they take matches outside of your country. Pick a side. This is the thing.
I don't agree with that, though. I mean, do they have... Here's the thing. I mean, which team is going to be willing to, unless you're like, I don't know, like Luton Town or somebody like that, who you feel like, you know, whatever they're going to pay to go somewhere is going to be willing to give away their home game to this.
The money will be more. You know why I know that? No team would sign off on it if the money to go abroad wasn't bigger than the home gate. It will be bigger.
Well, I understand the money will be bigger, but that's why I'm like, I mean, that's something.
What are you
I don't know,
losing?
like that's. I feel like, for example, Bickler, that's not something that should be done for money. You gotta. I mean, then never play in Anfield, and you can travel the world like globetrotters and make more money too. But do we really want that ultimately, or do you want this kept as much as possible? I realize the reality of money and everything, but I just think that's something that there are certain things that I'm totally okay with them doing for money because it is part of the operation. And yes, like you're saying, Gally, you can't have it both ways. But at the same time, Bickler, you gotta kind of keep it within certain boundaries and not totally sell out because it kind of takes you to a totally different thing. And next is maybe because I already see the way to Super League and I want to slow it down as much as possible.
I think there's a fine line between defending and supporting the values of your club that's important to your supporters and gatekeeping your club. Like I think there's a real fine line between the two of those things. And I think I see the argument where, you know, is it fair for that team supporters to lose a home match, right? But I also see the argument of like, you know, if you're talking about revenue gains and you want to gain it somewhere and you don't want to be ticket sales or jerseys to go up or something to go up, and then you're going to turn down the opportunity for the club to make a massive profit off one game for a primetime slot. I mean, and like, let's stop. Like, maybe this isn't as familiar to the international audience, but like, this is not breaking ground in America. We do this with the NFL now, right? Like specifically in London, right? And like, they're looking at adding games in Tokyo. They have a game in Mexico. They have, you know, they're doing one in Brazil where apparently the teams can't wear green. So, and both teams wear green. So we'll see what happens there.
And it's the Packers versus the Eagles, so there might be a problem about the green.
We'll be like, oh, is this game in black and white? No, it's just the jersey.
You're all colorblind, motherfuckers.
We had to wear neutral. We had to go to Brazil and wear neutral gang colors. So, yeah. So if we're taking the risk on that, like, I don't see how this is a big deal.
Yeah, it's going to be, I mean, like I say, to me, it just already signals, and we knew it was going to come along, and we knew when they, go ahead, yeah.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, I don't want to disagree with you, though. I think it came across there like I support this. I don't support it. My argument, though, is to those that want to rail on it. You didn't want 2% ticket increases, yet when the club tries to bring more revenue in, for a game that someone is willing to not only pay for, it will benefit all 20 clubs. Only 5 clubs, 6 clubs a year will have to travel outside the country, and it'll be a rotating basis. Yet every single club will benefit from it.
And that's what I'm thinking. It would be a team like Luton Town versus Liverpool, and Luton Town will be more than glad to give their home game
100%
that money. I just don't think the other way doesn't work as well, and I wouldn't want us to give away, regardless of the money, I wouldn't want us to give away home field's advantage. To basically selling out home field advantage just feels dirty, and I know we're going that way anyway. Maybe I'm just trying to, the old cynic bastard in me is trying to slow it down. But hey, we thought we had nothing to talk about. I have to actually, we could have probably just gone on this for like another hour and kind of like gone over this. But hopefully by next Monday, people, if nothing else, we'll hear from the Supporters Club from Netherlands something about Arnie, even if we don't hear directly from him. But we'll definitely like I really think we'll have at least something by then, hopefully. If nothing else, we'll talk more Euros because the Euros will have started. But we'll call the show for this week. Everybody have a great week. I'm going to go grab something to eat, get some of this freaking blood back in the system, hopefully. And then we'll see you guys next week. Take care.